Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. We talked a few days ago about the changes to the new MM2H program as compared with the previous one and some of the options around Malaysia. Now, Malaysia has been an amazing place to go. It's got really, I would say, unique characteristics. It stands out compared to many of the other options in the world, but a lot of people may feel today as though this is not such a great option given the changes in the program, as well as some of the things they've done with Labuan, as well as a bunch of the political situation that's going on there. So today I figured I would discuss with you what are some alternatives. Where should you move other than Malaysia now that Malaysia is, at least for the foreseeable future, a less attractive option than it once was. So I'm going to go through a variety of different countries with you. I'm going to look at it from a perspective of tax, cost of living, kind of quality of life, weather, etc. And, we'll see. Before we do that, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What are the places that you're thinking of? If you contrast, if you were thinking, okay, Malaysia was great, you're interested in Malaysia, wonderful. Where are places today that you see that represent kind of the most viable alternatives? And I'd love to hear your considerations again in terms of tax, in terms of things like weather, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of ease of getting residency, etc. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, nail the notification bell, make sure you hit the all notifications. Really appreciate your support always with this channel. Thank you very much. Please share it with other people. And if you'd like help with figuring out where to go, how to set yourself up, actual help doing it, we help you with both the strategy as well as the implementation, second citizenships, residencies, tax optimization, asset protection, forming companies, opening bank accounts, etc. Please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay. So, things that maybe some context, like things that I love about Malaysia. First of all, amazing cost of living. I've mentioned in a bunch of videos over the last, 2 years or something, about how, in my opinion, the quality of life per dollar spent is some of the best in the world. It's just incredible value. I like, personally, the weather there, the fact that it's basically, 23 to 32 degrees all year round, and, that's never super insanely hot, never cold. Some people dislike the humidity, fair enough. Some people dislike that it's kind of overcast a bunch of the year, fair enough. But for me, I like it. Next thing is taxes. You have no tax on foreign income from dividends, right? Or no tax on dividends in general there. No capital gains tax. This can be beneficial for things like crypto. And even if you're looking at the tax structuring, you could formally set up companies in Labuan and you could run active business through there and you could pay, say 3%. They've made that more difficult over time. So that's been a thing. And then on top of that, for me, there is the fact that you have a world-class city in Kuala Lumpur, like offers a massive amount, is really nice, is largely very clean, especially if you're in like the KLCC pavilion area. And so that mesh is really good. So I heard people saying, hey, listen, a place like Portugal seems more attractive than Malaysia. The problem I have with this is, to me, Portugal is not really very competitive with Malaysia. These are quite different places. Okay, you get zero tax under dividends if you're looking at Portugal, although to be fair, it's not local company dividends, so that kind of has some sort of a trade-off associated with it. It's only foreign company dividends. Then capital gains are taxed at a fairly high rate. The Portuguese tax rate in general is quite bad. The addition of socials makes things quite expensive. So you've got a bunch of these things that make it not so good in that regard. From a weather standpoint, it's not that nice in the winter. It is, by some people's measure, actually quite a bit nicer in a bunch of the year, if you, again, depending on your weather preferences. If you think about cleanliness, yeah, it's good. There's lots to like about Portugal, right? Let's not pretend that there isn't a bunch to like about Portugal, and it's one of the reasons why Portugal is really popular right now. This being said, would I compare it to Malaysia in terms of, like, you have a world-class city to live in? No. Lisbon is not Kuala Lumpur. Lisbon, some people might really like. People who like a more rural, smaller city, smaller town environment, Portugal's great for. this is, it's just not equivalent, right? But that being said, it is a place that I think represents a viable alternative for people who want to go there. And, it's relatively easy to get residency there, relatively easy to maintain it. So long as you're under the NHR program for 10 years, you have pretty good taxes. You can optimize them. I've done some videos on this. So that's, one option. Let's go in the other direction. You have places like Philippines. Philippines, I'm going to throw Vietnam in there, possibly Indonesia. You get countries like this. What's the problem with these? To me, these are just not at the standard of Malaysia. So Malaysia is not Singapore. Okay, we'll talk about Singapore in a second. But Malaysia is kind of a second tier down from Singapore. Singapore is, world class, everything works, super clean, super organized, super, all this kind of stuff. When you go down to places like Philippines, you're taking a big drop in just the kind of like the standard that you're going to find in that country. Much more dirty, much more chaotic, much less just in terms of what it offers. And so to me, again, it's not really comparable in the things that work out well. I would perhaps throw Thailand in there. Thailand is arguably one of the nearest competitors to Kuala Lumpur. I've often said that Kuala Lumpur is kind of like halfway between Thailand and Singapore, right? With lower costs than both of them, which is great. So in that sense, you could go get a Thai elite visa. You could, live there. And I mean, look, there are some things that are really fantastic. I've done a comparison video of Bangkok versus Kuala Lumpur. You can go check it out. But it's definitely chaotic. It's definitely dirty. It's definitely, you walk down the street and it stinks, and you inhale the, I don't know, to me it has a sense of being polluted. And of course there's areas of Malaysia that are quite bad as well, but there's also these areas that are super clean and super organized, etc. And so again, just a different comparable level when I'm looking at one city versus the next, one country versus the next. So, in that sense, take it for what you will. I would throw most of these other Southeast Asian countries in kind of a similar category. If I was to look at Jakarta, just not at the same standard as Kuala Lumpur. If I was to look at Indonesia in general, you've got kind of that more extreme Muslim influence, which again, kind of Malaysia's on that borderline side for many people. Then you can go and you can look at something like Cambodia, right? Again, just not developed to that same level yet. Again, Vietnam's progressing very quickly, right? Lots of promise in Vietnam. And Vietnam is, maybe up and coming one of the more interesting places in the sense that you can optimize your taxes pretty well. If you use the right international structure, you can typically come out to about 5% tax in Vietnam, which is pretty good. I think as the cities continue to develop and advance, there's a possibility Vietnam will eclipse Malaysia. You do have some language issues there because Malaysia has got a lot of English, whereas these other places not nearly as much English. Although again, Philippines, you have some comparisons there. So that's something, right? You can kind of throw around and see if you're interested. I would say that I have seen more, and I expect there to be more interest in people moving to Vietnam over time. If I would kind of take a look, I think that it's less likely that people will be moving to places like Jakarta, less likely that they'll move to places like Manila. Thailand is already super popular. It's gotten a lot more expensive, etc. Clearly, it's got an appeal, and it's probably going to continue to have that appeal. And then you've got Vietnam, which I think is, the fastest improving area in the region in that regard. Again, Cambodia you can kind of throw in a little bit more behind area. So that's another view. Then we can look at the high-end cities, right? We can compare it to places like Singapore. Very difficult to get residency in Singapore, right? You almost might as well just go into Malaysia at that point in time. The tax treatment, it's more difficult for sure to get favorable taxes in Singapore. And, the costs are much higher, much higher. Offers a lot. Singapore is a wonderful place. Certainly offers more than Malaysia in a bunch of regards and very accessible, etc. So for people who want to live there and can live there, hey, that's pretty good. On the other hand, does it fit that same niche? Not really, not really. You could go and look at someplace like Dubai. I think that, again, Dubai, much more expensive. Okay, it's got zero tax. Weather is, its own sort of difference in weather. To me, the weather's not nearly as good. It doesn't really fit the same appeal, although I think a lot of the people who would consider Malaysia, who are kind of on the higher end as entrepreneurs, would be more likely to now consider Dubai as an option as a trade-off. So that's something to be aware of. One of the places that you may consider as being more comparable to Malaysia in certain regards, obviously each of these places I'm kind of bringing up have their own comparison, right? Certainly culturally and in a bunch of these regards, Singapore is very close to Malaysia. If you were to look in terms of just kind of in terms of cost basis, maybe some of the other Southeast Asian countries, in terms of kind of the way the tax system works, maybe you'd look at certain elements of Portugal. I would say one place that has some elements, it's never been as appealing to me. For me, it's just, I've never felt as comfortable there. I don't find things kind of fit quite the same way. But the truth is, it has the low costs to a large extent. It has kind of certain very high-end cosmopolitan areas. And that is Turkey, right? Turkey is very diverse. Turkey, is a place that you can easily get citizenship, let alone residency. The trade-off there is that taxes are not so good in Turkey. Now, it's interesting. I'll do some videos in the future about this, but one of the things about Turkey that's kind of interesting is they often have these cycles where people haven't paid, and then there's kind of like a tax amnesty, and they can basically get caught up on their past taxes at a huge discount. So there are some things that people aren't really aware of in terms of how the Turkish system works that might be interesting to you if you're interested in paying attention. I have a close friend who moved to Eastern Europe and explored Dubai and some of these places, and his comment was that the place that he would most like to live aside from the taxes was Turkey. And so I think that's an interesting indicator. There's certainly some things that are less polished there than some other areas, but it has an interesting fit. The weather certainly is different, right? But if you're talking about things like medical services, I mean, there's massive medical tourism in Turkey. It really offers a lot in that regard. And so, it's got a certain different alternative that might fit if that's something that you're looking for. What about Latin America? Latin America, in my experience, has a lot of the places have a less polish than this. There's just less of a service culture, less high-end, cosmopolitan, etc. side of cities. You've of course got places like Panama City, but much more expensive, right? Of course, they just kind of got rid of the Friendly Nations visa program, which makes it less attractive. Certainly it's a less convenient part of the world in general. It's maybe possible that there's some city in there that you're going to find, but again, a bunch of the ones who have, say, maybe high quality cities or something like this, then are less safe, or they don't have as good tax policies, etc., etc. So something to think about in that regard as to what might fit for you. What about Eastern Europe? Eastern Europe, I think, certainly on the cost side, can be competitive if you compare places like Georgia, Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, etc. These places can have comparable costs to what you'll find in something like Malaysia, at least for a lot of things. I find they're much less convenient, much less established. You can just pay attention to, like, the banking is of lower quality, the ability to kind of order things online, the ability to just go and have access to varieties of food and other options. Certainly those things are somewhat less than you would get in Malaysia. On the other hand, you also have weather. Now the weather is certainly colder than Malaysia, and that might be okay for you, right? Maybe you're somebody who you'd prefer something a little bit colder. So hey, that's an option. Certainly in a country like Ukraine, I mean, Kiev, big city, offers quite a lot. Not as big as the KL area, but the KL itself, it actually is, I believe, slightly smaller than Kiev in terms of population. So that's something for you to think about. Again, just, I would call it, you have all these old buildings in Eastern Europe, and that gives you a different lifestyle experience. Also the culture, you get a very warm English-speaking culture in Malaysia. You don't get that so much in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe on the surface is very cold, and by default it's not English-speaking. So you have a certain friction for living that kind of creates some discomfort around that. So that gives a little bit of an idea of some of the places that you might consider going. If we were to, go and plan it out, I think one of the things that this emphasizes to me is that you should probably be looking at, you'll have to do a little bit more sophisticated structuring. So the most comparable places might be, each in their own way. Someplace like Vietnam, someplace like Thailand, someplace like Turkey, someplace like maybe one of the other Eastern European countries, something like that. Again, kind of if you were to mash them together, maybe you would end up with a little bit of a KL, or on the high end, certainly someplace like Singapore, and then obviously there's something compelling about Dubai as a zero tax, world-class city, but you lack the green, you lack all of that side of the natural side of it, and again the weather is different, so you get a different experience. Anyway, that's kind of an overview of the world as I see it in terms of the places to go. I've done some videos previously on some of the visa programs. I'll continue to do some more of them on some of these regions to get you some idea of what's your best way to gain access to those areas. And I'll also go through and I'll do some tax planning videos specifically around how do you optimize when you're living in Vietnam, or how do you optimize when you're living in Philippines, or places like that, in order to help you out a little bit. So we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas, suggestions, comments, things that I may have missed. I'm sure there's probably something I overlooked. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that feedback. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If not, please tell me why. Appreciate the feedback. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.